Hey folks, in this video we'll be exploring part 2 of building your own homebrewed adventure.
So as we covered in the earlier video, part 4A, that was kind of the pre-planning. So that was getting all the broad pictures, and now we're actually sitting down and kind of planning out each stage of the encounter.
The things that you'll be looking to do when you build an adventure are setting the hook, getting the party committed, a series of obstacles, and the resolution. So let's jump in. In the last video, we talked about this adventure being centered around something happening in the mine for our town. The mine adventure is going to be the first major adventure that our players go on, and they'll be around level 3. That's either because they rolled a level 1 character and we've been doing small things around town, or we just have started them at level 3, and this might be session 2.
So as you're building out the adventure, come up with a hook. This is the thing that's going to get the player's attention to something is wrong and they need to step in, or there is a job that they can do, whatever it is. So for us, we decided the hook was that there was a burst of smoke and a loud bang that comes from the direction of the mine.
People will be screaming and yelling, and this should be enough to get our adventurers to head that way.
As we said in our part 4A, one of the things that is kind of going to draw our players into wanting to be invested in going and checking out this mine collapse is that one of the players' cousin is one of the miners, so they probably want to go rescue their cousin.
Other examples of setting the hook might be having them overhear some rumors, or seeing a town guard nail a new flyer on a bulletin board of jobs that are posted around town.
And next you'll want to build in a number of obstacles. And these obstacles, as you're building them, you don't necessarily have to come up with each of them in order. Oftentimes, I'll actually kind of start with the end. I'll start with what is kind of the big climactic moment that I'm going to want in this encounter, and then think kind of backwards of, well, what are some obstacles that will lead up to it, or what are some other monsters that might be related or that the players might run into along the way. And then as I'm kind of planning out, I might think of like, oh, this is really good for like the second obstacle. And then as I'm kind of reading up something for that climactic moment, I might come up with a idea of like, oh, this would be a great monster for them to run into early on as like a first or third obstacle that kind of clues in maybe what kind of encounters they might be running into.
Once they arrive at the mine, our players are going to experience the very first obstacle, which is some monsters outside of the mine that are terrorizing everyone. What we're looking to put them up against are a couple of dire goats. Animals that they're familiar with, but somehow changed and in this dire form. That should give them a nice fight. After 2 rounds of combat, however, the ground will shake again, and they'll be forced to deal with a boulet.
And this is kind of maybe a little bit of a red herring, making the party think maybe the boulet is responsible for the mine getting damaged.
4 characters at a level 3, this is a deadly encounter. So to help balance that out, we're putting this boulet at half hit points, and we can describe it as being pretty banged up. Maybe it encountered some resistance or some damage in the mine that it's coming out of. And if they really need it, if things are going against them, we can have a couple of NPC miners with pickaxes jump in and help with the fight. Once that fight's over, that's when they learn about a collapse in a new shaft of the mine. And it's also some very important information. They find out that the cousin of one of the players is stuck in that newly collapsed area. This should be enough to get them invested and go in and want to complete the adventure. The next step in putting together this adventure is to get the party committed.
And so in this particular situation, they are going down into the mine, and the elevator mine shaft that they are using breaks down once they get down there. The miners are able, up at the top, are able to communicate down to the party, whether it's yelling or using something like a message spell, that they will be able to fix the elevator or find an alternate way of bringing people up, but it's going to take several hours, maybe a day, kind of however long it's going to take your party to get through the mine, find the miners, and get back. The idea of like, you guys go, find the miners, rescue them, we'll have it fixed by the time you get back.
Now that we're down in the mine, let's talk about something. I'm going to tell you some of the major encounters that are going on in this mine adventure, but there's a lot of room to expand this. I'm giving myself room to expand things as I plan an adventure. I can make a map and have lots of other small caverns and dead ends and open areas so that they can really explore things, maybe even feel a little bit like a dungeon crawl. But then I'll be placing these major obstacles in very specific locations in order to further the story and further the adventure.
And then once they get down there, they're going to run into kind of the first real combat encounter that's going to clue them in on what is going on, which is they're going to run into a combination of dust and mud methods. This is something as you're building encounters, you don't necessarily have to have like one big one, or even always have every single encounter be hard or deadly. Must methods are probably going to be pretty easy for a group of 4 third level players to take care of, depending on how many there are, but more so that's going to clue them into this is something no one has ever seen in the area and something weird is going on in the mine. So as you're building these obstacles, you can kind of start sprinkling in clues and story elements of what is going on. Also with the obstacles, they don't all have to be combat encounters. You can have environmental obstacles, they could be puzzles, they could also be like moral quandaries or more of a social obstacle needing to negotiate their way or talk to someone. So for the next obstacle, we're going to introduce a environmental obstacle.
It's almost a little bit of a puzzle. Well, it's a puzzle in and of the fact that they have to figure out how to deal with the situation. So after a little bit of exploration, they come to a large gap, a chasm that has opened up. And by exploring it, maybe some perception checks or just how they word their questions, it's clear that this is a new gap that has opened up. And it's going to cause a pretty big problem because they have to get across it. And this is going to be the only way for them to venture further in. So they're going to have to figure this out. Now, laying around this chasm, we'll see some old rotten boards and some frayed ropes. They could try to use some of those things in this area to try to get across. It may be that they go back into the mine and find materials to be able to bridge this gap. It's about a 50 or 60 foot chasm that's a little lower than the area that they're on. Or they could completely come up with something themselves. Maybe they've got some equipment, or maybe they come up with some magical solutions. That's fine. If they want, they can even try to go to the far edges of this area and simply rock climb across. This gives me a lot of fun ways to let them come up with the solution. And to be honest, some of these types of situations, as a DM, it's a great idea for you to have some ideas of possible solutions. But also, I like to just say, yeah, you know what, that works, that's great, if my players come up with a really cool idea. But the idea is that this is not combat. They've got to think it through and work together in order to create some kind of bridge or rope or something to get across the gap.
Once they get across the gap, they are going to stumble across the first group of miners who are a little injured, so they might need help getting back across the gap. And so that's going to leave the kind of party with this choice of, okay, well, do they take that group back first to make sure that they're safe and kind of waiting at the base of that elevator? Do they leave them there and try and catch them when they're coming back with the rest of the miners? How is it that they're going to handle these miners? Or potentially do they bring them along, which could maybe put the miners at more risk, or keep them safe because your party's at least watching over them? It's that kind of giving the party opportunities to make their own choices that will then affect the rest of the adventure.
This is a spot that I've built in as a DM for them to learn information about this adventure. Here's where they're going to learn that the cousin is trapped further in still, and that the monsters, these mephits that they'd never met before, happened to show up right after a small earthquake, some loud, strange noises, and then a much much larger earthquake. Now, this group isn't exactly sure what it is that happened, but they know that whatever happened, it's the group that the cousin was a part of. Hopefully what this does is build a sense of urgency and continuing to provide little pearls of information for them to pursue as they continue to get further down the mine, meeting other groups and whatever else it is that's down in the depths.
Big thanks to all of our patrons, especially Ari. If you want to support our channel, you can head on over to patreon.com/rollforinitiative and check out the perks of being a patron. All right, let's get back into building this adventure.
At this point, I would have the map set up for them to do plenty more exploration, maybe find a couple of other individual miners that they can talk to, some treasure, or they might feel like taking any treasure down here is the property of the mine, so who knows, maybe they will or won't take it, and even some other smaller combat encounters if I so choose. But ultimately, they'll be getting to a larger chasm with the second group of miners and our next obstacle. The fourth obstacle is the fact that these miners are directly being attacked by a large rust monster. It's straight up combat where they're not only needing to defeat the monster, but also keep another group of NPCs safe.
These are things that some of the party probably knows are common to find in the mine. It's something miners deal with from time to time, and they probably were just disturbed by the earthquake and decided, oh, we're hungry. We're going to go eat the mining equipment.
As they've been doing all of this and exploring, it's going to be important for me to really convey a sense of how much time it's taking. It's not a quick 20-minute stroll. They've been down here for hours. With the rust monster defeated, they have saved a second group of miners, and they can get some more information about the cousin and what it is that started things. While this group isn't exactly sure what the cousin found, they know that the cousin said something about discovering an artifact embedded in the rock, and then that cousin chipped away and removed the artifact. As soon as that happened, there was a small quake, some very strange noises, and out of all of the cracks and fissures, these strange creatures, these mephits, started to arise. The cousin got really scared and ran deeper in to a fissure that had opened up and is now lost. That fissure is right there, and it's the next area where our party is going to have to go. Now, this fissure is designed in such a way to be almost a mini obstacle. It's tight enough and jagged and sharp enough that any creature with no armor or light armor will be able to wriggle their way through. It's claustrophobic and uncomfortable, but they can do it. However, creatures with medium or heavy armor are going to have to make some checks for me. They'll be making 3 moderately difficult dexterity checks. Now, on one failure, they'll be taking 2d6 damage, which at level 3 might be quite a bit. A second failure will give another 2d6 amount of damage, which is quite a bit at 3rd level, and a third failure will render their armor useless until they're able to get it repaired. Now, this is a good chance to note that as a DM, you know, and you can maybe find a way to give this information. Any character with medium or heavy armor that takes the time to take that armor off and very carefully move through the fissure, they don't need to make those dexterity checks, but it just takes a lot of time, and then they'll have to take even more time putting their armor back on the other side.
The area beyond these fissures seems like a safe place to rest. It is good to provide those opportunities for the party to rest on a longer adventure or one that has a bunch of combat, even if it's just a short rest. Depending on the party makeup, you might have players that have characters that really do need those regular short rests to kind of reset their abilities. And it also provides maybe opportunities for the players to strategize how they're going to handle moving forward. So that's why they kind of, once they pass through these natural fissures, they kind of notice, okay, this area seems pretty calm, pretty safe. We can stop, catch our breath, come up with a plan, and potentially rest.
The end of that rest, if they decide to take it, they hear the cousin from deeper in screaming for help, which is going to lead to the climax of our situation and our last obstacle.
As you're building this, keep in mind what the potential outcomes you want to have happen, and use those to help you as you're building that climax into the resolution. And also keep in mind how this adventure is going to fit into the rest of your campaign. So this adventure is very much setting up kind of the ideas and the themes for our longer running adventure. We might have had one or two adventures earlier on, since it is starting with level 3, that is kind of introducing the town to the adventurers, maybe introducing and establishing some relationships with the PCs, as well as giving the player characters a chance to kind of work out their relationships before jumping into the meat of the adventure. But with this, we're going to really kind of introduce, here's the long-running problem that you're going to be trying to deal with, and then having all of these little adventures and steps along the way that will build up to that.
The final obstacle here is to rescue the cousin. After they get out of that nice little cavern where they took their rest and they run down a natural shaft that's open up, it opens up into another slightly larger room where they see the cousin being attacked by more mephits, but more importantly in the room, we see an earth elemental. This is a creature that is absolutely a deadly encounter for 4 level 3 characters, and it's a creature that nobody in this town has experienced before. A good persuasion check will let the players know that the mephits are simply trying to subdue the cousin, to grapple them and to get something out of their possession. It doesn't seem like they're actually trying to kill the cousin. But the earth elemental is definitely here for combat and will fight to the death at this point. After combat is finished, the mephits will back off. However, they do block the party from the exit. They're not advancing, but they don't want to let the party go anywhere. After a few seconds of this, they feel a small earthquake, and the wall on the other side from the entrance shapes itself into a vaguely face-like shape and begins to speak to the party. Now, they're only getting one word at a time, and it's a very deep and gravelly, rough voice. But this voice is saying things like stolen and return. It's calling them jailers and captors and oppressors. You can figure out however you want to do that, but the idea is that the face is conveying that it wants the artifact back. And eventually the players see that what the cousin has discovered is a very ornate, clearly expensive hilt from a sword that's been broken off. Here the players have some choices to make. Now, if the characters decide to simply take the hilt of the sword and leave it there and cause no problems, they'll be allowed to leave without any combat. A fairly difficult persuasion check will allow them to sort of strike a deal and say they want to take the hilt with them, but they'll learn what they can from the face, which isn't very much, just that it feels like it's been wronged and it's been imprisoned, and that this sword hilt somehow has something to do with it. Or they can try to fight again. Now, the characters have gone through a pretty hefty fight, so it's probably not a great idea. As a DM, I'm going to try to convey that this looks like something that they probably can't win. The last option is they could try to take the hilt and just run. Now, if they do decide to run with the sword hilt or engage in combat, then that face will have the stat blocks of an earth elemental. So again, that's a pretty high CR. However, it only has a movement speed of 10. As the wall starts to close in on the party, either forcing them out the entrance they came through or be crushed to death inside this cavern. The Mephits, as they fight purely defensively, trying to grapple and disarm the party, and at any point that they drop that sword hilt and run, they'll be allowed to escape. Whatever it is that my party has come up with, either by bargaining or leaving or running, they run back through everything. They will be faced with that chasm and the 3 dexterity checks, unless they take the time to take their armor off in the middle of combat. See, I'm really suggesting that combat's not the right suggestion here. They will get back to the chasm, run across it. Now, if they destroy the makeshift bridge, then go ahead and let them know that that gap will probably keep the Mephits and whatever that other creature was at bay for a little while. And then eventually back to the elevator shaft, which has been cleared, and a rope provided so they can get out of the mine. Lastly, we have our resolution, where we find out that indeed the cousin had simply found this artifact embedded in the rock, either that you've left down in the mine or you still have with you. However, many of the miners that you've saved have all come back and are happy and healthy, and we know that the mine for the time being is closed. Now, that strange face creature is going to come back later in this game. But for the time being, our players have completed their first major adventure, and the mine is closed for them to come back to at a later date.
There you have it. We have an adventure for a party of 4 third-level characters that will set the groundwork for the rest of the kind of main storyline of this campaign.
As you plan your adventure, you want to make sure that you set the hook, get your party committed, come up with a number of different obstacles, have the climax of that adventure, as well as thinking about the resolution. Of course, paying attention to where is your party able to rest, where can they find help or aid, some treasure, some items, as well as the types of monsters they're going to face and how difficult those fights are all important things for you to come up with as you plan your adventure.
I really hope that you've enjoyed this Let's Build a Town series. It's potentially helped you build your own town setting that you can run a campaign in. And we're going to be kind of, as we can, working on putting this together into something that potentially you can run yourself. So make sure to keep an eye on our socials for more news about that. Since we have a little one, it might take us a little bit of time, but we're working on it. All right, I'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye. If you've missed any of the rest of our Let's Build a Town series, we have them all in a playlist, and I'll link it up here so you can start from the beginning and watch your way all the way through.